Hey, it's Goal Oriented, Episode 2. I am your host, Chandler Engelbrecht, and I'm joined by
Mason Young
and Austin Curtright.
Guys, happy to be back. Second episode here, coming off of OU's 23-16 win over Nebraska last weekend. It was a fun time. That was my main prediction for that game. We can ignore score predictions and just about everything else. I said it was going to be just a fun time. But for everybody involved, I thought it was a great atmosphere. Good to see just a bunch of fans in Gaylord Memorial Stadium. And, yeah, they just played well. Good, I think, not game of the century type game, but still just a fun watch. Let's talk about that atmosphere for a little bit. Austin, you are our go-to guy when it comes to drip rankings, if you want to define what that is before we talk about it. But, Austin, what did you see from the guys coming into that game?
First off, I'm just glad we've made it to podcast 2, to be honest. I didn't know if we were going to ever make it to this, but we're here. Yeah, drip rankings, just a little background on that. Our photographers, Trey Young, Edward Reality, little shout out there, but OU does a pregame walk of champions where everyone is just to showcase their best outfits before the game. And so I've took that as a act upon myself. A former sports editor from the Daily has kind of coined that, Vic Reynolds. But basically, each week I take my 4 favorite outfits I see from the players we see, and I rank them. So that's something I've been doing this year on Twitter. But
who had the best fit on Saturday?
I don't think anyone can beat Jayne at this point. I'm convinced that he is literally incapable of putting together a bad outfit. Spencer Rattler's was pretty cool. He came out with a huge chain with his logo, which is the biggest flex I've ever seen. He's getting paid so much money in NIL, I assume. So that was cool. DJ Graham came out with a cool yellow unbuttoned shirt. That was sick with the glasses.
I remember him with the yellow shirt, kind of stealing the show in a lot of ways. But other than that, Mason, the atmosphere overall, a lot of fans, a lot of tailgating. Big Noon was there. That's a big deal.
Well, let's start by considering that I walk into our office here at the OU Daily around 9 a.m. that morning, 2 hours before kickoff, expecting what we'd kind of come to expect through covering college football during COVID, that the parking lot behind us would be pretty quiet. No, I could barely find a parking spot in my own parking lot because of all the Nebraska fans that were tailgating behind our office. And so that obviously showed that they travel well, and it was really interesting to see kind of the atmosphere and the excitement they brought to the stadium. But I thought OU fans were out tailgating and also being at the game, staying deeper into the game than they ever had at any point. Just a lot of excitement from fans and from also former players who were there and who were honored at halftime, just with the nostalgia of what that historic rivalry brought to the table. So,
also pregame on Big Noon, Barry Switzer came out with one of the roughneck guns. I was like, "What are you doing here?" He also just was. He said something about using fur coats, giving fur coats to players when they traveled to Nebraska back in the day, and he was like, we got to use them because it's so cold outside. And I was just like, he was just being an old man on TV, and it was really funny.
But what else from Big Noon? They also have Bob Stoops on their show now. Obviously, he's an OU legend in his own right. What was that like watching him? You guys both attended Big Noon to see what was going on there. Mason, what did you see from Bob?
Yeah, it was really strange. I feel like we didn't get as close as we wanted to really get a feel for what Big Noon was like. We'd kind of wanted to because College Game Day came here last year for Bedlam, and that was in the stadium because of COVID precautions, so we didn't really get to see what that was like. But we were really only at Big Noon for 5 minutes. I think the people that were able to get in and around the stage and really hear what they were saying got really excited. It was a good atmosphere for the fans that were there to enjoy that. But for me, I didn't really get that much out of it. I couldn't get close to really tell what was going on. So
it's kind of a huge day for the former OU coaches brand. Switzer came out. Stoops, from the little podium that he was set up at, just started a random OU Boomer Sooner chant with the entire crowd, and then they were doing their post-game predictions there, or their pre-game predictions, and he was picking Oklahoma State versus Boise State, obviously two teams that he probably doesn't like for pretty obvious reasons, and that was really funny. He was just like, I don't really want to pick either, but I guess I'll pick Oklahoma State because I live here.
I think he was a little bit more adamant about that. I think he specifically said, "I will never pick Boise State." So there's obviously some pent-up frustration there, but.
But speaking of frustrations, there was obviously a push to make this game feel like a rivalry matchup, considering the two teams have a lot of history. Again, they played in the game of the century, which was 50 years ago, and was one of the greatest college football games of all time. But I thought it worked, going in there and seeing the Nebraska fans who, like you said, Mason, travel really well. OU fans seemed really into it. The student section, I think, stayed for mostly the entire game. That's a shout out to them. Usually they dip around that start of the second half. But it played like a rivalry game. Obviously, these teams came out. They were competitive. Austin, before the game started, looked at us and said, I think this is going to be a close game. And I said, no way, which was pretty much the third time I was wrong about how this game was going to go. But let's talk about that. OU came out with a drive that lasted what felt like 2 hours, but it took 6 minutes off the clock. 6, is that right?
Yeah, about 6 minutes, 14 plays.
Which is uncharacteristic of OU's offense. Usually it scores in, under a minute. But they came out, sort of made a statement on the opening drive, and then from there the game played out differently than just about everybody expected.
I thought it was interesting. I was actually looking this over today, but from OU's 3 touchdown drives, 12 plays, 14 plays, 10 plays. All over, 2 of them were close to 7 minutes long. Another one was 4.5 minutes long, which is obviously something we have not seen previously from Lincoln Riley offenses.
Well, and you and I were talking about this earlier, Austin. It's almost like they've, in a way, kind of flipped the script of what Oklahoma football is. Like, what we've seen the past few years from OU is Lincoln Riley is going to throw his offense into a barn burner and try to blow out everybody and hope the defense holds up on the other end. But we're seeing this change in approach where it's the defense is really good now, and they can win OU games. So OU will deploy that defense and try to limit the opponent, and then it's going to do enough to get by on offense. And really right now, I wouldn't go as far as say as deploying him like a wishbone quarterback, but Spencer Rattler almost gives me that old-timey feel right now at quarterback because of the way that they're just using him with short passes, not really throwing the ball downfield, and having these long drives, like you mentioned, to really shorten the game for their opponent and dominate in time of possession.
Spencer obviously came into this season with huge, lofty Heisman expectations, but, maybe those were just unfair from the beginning, possibly. He ended last year on the groove like he did, but, maybe Spencer Rattler being a Heisman is not what this team needs to, fulfill its national championship expectations.
And as much as people might like to see Caleb Williams play with the flashy debut he had against Western Carolina, Spencer Rattler has the keys to the Bentley, like literally. I mean, Lincoln Riley wholeheartedly trusts him, and they're going to stick with him from here on out.
Yeah, I think that's kind of obvious at this point, is Lincoln wants to have Rattler out there for as long as possible. I don't think a quarterback change is something this team has on its mind going forward. But speaking of quarterbacks, Adrian Martinez, I think, balled out, especially in that, the start of the game. He did a really good job of, even though the OU defense played well, he did a good job of kind of keeping the offense moving. The OU defense struggled on getting off the field on third downs, stuff like that. But he was mobile, made some good passes, and from there, I think he played a pretty good game.
Yeah, and this was something that was brought up today in conversations with Lincoln Riley at his presser, was college football just feels kind of off this year in more respects than one, but I think in this particular respect, I think we're seeing kind of some quarterbacks that we thought were really good not perform up to expectations. I think we're seeing other quarterbacks who we really didn't expect a lot of, like Adrian Martinez, like Michael Pratt from Tulane, who played against OU Week 1 and played by all accounts pretty well. I think we're seeing some of those quarterbacks of that ilk kind of show us that maybe they're a little bit better than we thought they were.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I feel like even just from a fan's perspective, that this college football season's been a little bit weird. Seeing Ohio State struggle with teams like Tulsa, OU obviously having that close game with Tulane. It's a bit of a weird feeling, and it's almost like fans are completely back, but teams are still not are completely back, but in a different way. Still reaping the
Almost the
yeah,
consequences of COVID
COVID.
19.
Yeah,
Right. Before we dive into stuff like that, I still want to talk about this game more. You just mentioned the fans' perspective. Maybe these teams, are still needing some time to adjust. I'm going to give another late shout out to both Justin Jayne and Georgia Bomar, our podcast producers that are in the studio with us at the moment. Thank you guys for everything you do. But they even said today, hey, there's just a lot of weird teams in college football right now. It kind of feels like more competitive. The teams that are supposed to be good aren't quite getting there. But we'll dive into that later as we talk into presser stuff. But OU took a 7-3 lead into half, which felt more Big Ten football-esque than anything else this season. Again, everyone projected OU to kind of pull about a 3-touchdown lead at some point in this game. That never happened. In that second half, there was some incredible plays. The blocked PAT, Pat Fields returned for a defensive 2-point conversion, DJ Graham's interception. What did you guys see out of this team in the second half that really made sure this team came out of that game with a victory?
Well, I think for one, we kind of saw, and this was something that was discussed today, was we saw the emergence a little bit of Isaiah Coe, junior defensive lineman, a transfer from Iowa Western, and media members got to talk to him today for the first time since he came to OU in the spring. It's been interesting to see him kind of climb the ladder as Perion Winfrey's backup at nose guard and their former Iowa Western teammates, by the way. So it's kind of an interesting little tie-in. But he obviously had the blocked extra point attempt that was recovered by Pat Fields and taken across field for 2 points. So I think Isaiah Coe is really interesting and a good depth piece for OU on an already really good defensive line moving forward, and likely projects as probably a starter for them next year. And I thought the other thing that was interesting was we saw the improved cornerback play from a guy in DJ Graham, and I'll let Austin talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so didn't bat down the ball there on the 2-yard line, but probably made literally the best catch I've ever seen. Obviously, it was on 4th down. Linebacker Nick Benito forced Adrian Martinez to leave the pocket and forced him to make a throw into coverage where DJ Graham obviously made the leaping one-handed grab there. But that kind of brings up another point of something that I saw in the second half that was really important, and that was just sort of Nick Benito's play overall. Obviously, he's projecting as one of OU's best players this season, if not playing as that best player this season. He had 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks against Nebraska, but he was largely tasked with being that sort of linebacker spy on Adrian Martinez, trying to limit his rushing ability that entire game, and he still managed to create pressure even though he wasn't rushing typically as much as he did. And he also played more snaps, and the defense, who's been subbing guys in and out all season, kind of stopped that a little bit there in the second half, and Nick Benito really got to sort of almost take over this game.
Yeah, I think the defense, again, was the reason OU won this game, which you can now say for 2 out of their 3 games, which is uncharacteristic of a Lincoln Riley offense. Usually this offense is pointed to as the reason OU won a game. Lincoln Riley has, 48 wins in 5 years as OU's head coach, and I would say the majority of those has been because he simply had an offense that was one of the best in the country out there. But how this game ended was a critical defensive stand as time expired by OU's defense. Post-game, Lincoln Riley and offensive players came out and just said, hey, we didn't score as many points as we wanted to, but that's college football. Sometimes it happens. I want to say that this defense looks to be one of the better ones Lincoln Riley has had in recent years. But with this offense, I don't know where it is yet.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that just plays into what Nebraska was coming into this game trying to do. Other than the short drive they had just as halftime expired that OU got, they really only had 8 possessions in this game So I think they scored 3 touchdowns on 8 of their possessions. That's really not that bad. I think that a lot of the points being down is Lincoln referenced this after the game. He said the game was sort of similar to the Army game a few years ago, just because it wasn't as extreme, but the offense just wasn't getting as many opportunities as they typically do to score, just because they weren't on the field as much. I think they ended up just edging out Nebraska in time of possession, but Nebraska and OU both seem to be putting a pretty big precedent on wanting to have long drives there. So I think that's just another thing to add onto the evolution of what this team is becoming.
And it'll be interesting to see if we see that evolution continue. I'm not necessarily sold that everything OU's done through 3 games offensively is a harbinger of what they're going to do for the rest of the season. I think one of their biggest issues right now is they're still trying to figure out what is the best offensive line combination in which they can run the ball effectively. And once they can start running the ball better with Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray, and keep teams honest defensively, then other teams aren't going to be able to drop back in zone as much and limit the deep passes. It's going to open the deep passing game to play action. Receiver Drake Stoops said as much today, that he thinks that deep ball for Spencer Rattler is going to improve and that eventually it's going to be there. It's pretty hard to stop a Lincoln Riley offense from being a Lincoln Riley offense. So far, successful, but does it mean it will be throughout the course of the season for every team that plays against OU? I wouldn't bet on it.
In Lincoln referenced today that, a question was asked about Spencer being in such a groove to end last season, but he, talked about how that offense had been playing so many games together over the course of that season. But, this team has Eric Gray, who's a new guy, Kennedy Brooks, who's a new guy, Jayne Hazelwood's back from injury, freshman Mario Williams. Spencer's working with almost a completely new offense in different positions and different places, and I think that's something that just naturally is bound to improve as the season goes on. But I think the biggest thing that's been missing from this offense has been the deep pass. Spencer's just not attempting passes downfield, whether that's what the defense is giving him, whether that's the scheme or him just missing those. We can't really ever tell, but I think that's been what the biggest thing that's been missing is.
There was one play the other day that was called into question where he had Jaden Hazelwood on the left side of the field, Mike Woods on the right side of the field. Mike Woods runs an out, and he's completely wide open. The safety just didn't really follow him, but he throws it to Jaden Hazelwood on the left side instead, with 2 or 3 defenders around. And yeah, he completes the pass, and they get the yardage. But you kind of question the reads there. And again, I'm no expert on quarterback reads or anything. I don't know what's going through Spencer Rattler's head in those moments. But you do kind of wonder, is he seeing everything as well as you would like him to see as a coach? Lincoln Riley says so, and knowing his pedigree in developing quarterbacks, I would take him at his word there. So I think we're only going to see Spencer Rattler improve and the deep ball open up as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot more about this team in the next few weeks. Obviously, they start Big 12 play. They escaped last week, finish out their non-conference schedule with an undefeated 3-0 record. But let's jump to what we learned today. We've already said a lot about some stuff that was said, but we attended Lincoln Riley's press conference today at noon, catered by Midway Deli. Shout out to Midway Deli, a fan of that. Barry Switzer also visits there, I believe, every day. Shout out to Barry as well. What did we learn today? There was a few injury updates. Darby still has some issues. Danny Stutzman will still have some issues. Mason, what did you see there?
Well, we didn't really learn much about Brian Darby or really Danny Stutzman. Everything that I've heard in terms of Danny Stutzman's timetable is he will return for OU Texas at the earliest. So be very interesting to see when they get him out of that arm sling and get him practicing again. In terms of what we did find out about injuries today, Billy Bowman is expected to be back for the game against West Virginia this coming weekend after having what we believe to be a hamstring injury against Western Carolina. So they will definitely benefit from having that starting nickel back in the fold again. And he had already made a lot of impactful plays as a freshman, so OU will benefit from him returning. What's really going to hurt OU for we really don't know how long, but it looks like for the long term is Woody Washington's absence. You're looking at your veteran, most experienced cornerback being out for an extended period of time, which is what Lincoln Riley told us today. They expect him to be back at some point this season, but we just don't really know what that's going to be, and so they're really going to need DJ Graham and Jaden Davis to continue to step up like they did against Nebraska. And I'm really curious as to where Justin Harrington fits into the mix from here on out. He's kind of a guy that seemingly at cornerback has kind of disappeared. Do we see him maybe emerge now that they've played a week without Woody Washington and they're figuring out life without Woody? Or is he going to be moved somewhere else? Is he going to stay on the bench? I think he's an interesting piece in filling that hole.
Also, back to Midway Deli. Getting Midway Deli once a week as a college student, very clutch.
It's free.
Can't complain about free food, that's for sure.
I went and ate there last week, and my meal was like $18, and that is just not sustainable for a 20-year-old in college. But getting it for free, way cooler. So thank you, OU Athletics. But I think the biggest takeaway, from today was Lincoln saying, he doesn't need the team collectively to get way, way better. They're really close. He just needs to see a little bit of improvement from everyone, and I think that's really interesting to hear from him thinking that, the team is sort of on the cusp.
Yeah, and in referring to a little bit better, obviously Mason just highlighted times where Rattler perhaps made the wrong read, or, maybe they just didn't do something on a play where they should have. I do wonder how much better this offense can be. I think as Eric Gray just gets more comfortable in the system, maybe that run game opens up a bit. Obviously, they still have somewhat of a center battle going on between Robert Conjul and Andrew Rame. So maybe somewhere in there, this team finds some more consistency and goes on. Anyway, they play West Virginia this week. Open up conference play rather. Mason, for this weekend, what do you think is going to happen with the Sooners?
Well, this is very interesting because West Virginia lost their opener against Maryland, but is riding a pair of wins now. After that, they beat Virginia Tech last week, who upset North Carolina during the first week of the season. So West Virginia kind of has their mojo right now. I think this is probably going to be Nebraska's defense, by all accounts, is very good, and Tulane's defense was much better than expected, but I think this is probably going to be one of the better defenses that OU faces in the Big 12 this year, and that all starts with Jared Bartlett, who leads the Big 12 with 3 sacks. So OU will need to be on its toes with the offensive line, making sure they have the right combinations out there in pass protection to keep him blocked up. And fortunately, that is a strength of OU's right now, is being able to protect Spencer Rattler. So the question is whether or not they're going to be able to run the ball against a really stout West Virginia defensive line.
And this will be the first time in 2 seasons where OU and West Virginia have played. Obviously, they didn't play last year due to COVID-19 protocols COVID-19 issues within West Virginia's program. It'll be the first time Alex Grinch's defense has seen the Mountaineer offense since 2019. So, Austin, Grinch talked about that a lot today. What do you think is going to happen between the Mountaineer offense and the Sooners defense?
Yeah, so they have 2 pretty impact names in quarterback Jared Dagey, who's been there for seemingly forever, but and then Letty Brown, who's Alex Grinch said one of the premier backs in the country. So they're definitely no cupcake offense per se, but they're gonna be hard to handle. Neither OU nor West Virginia won this game last year, as they didn't play. Do you think that either of these teams are gonna be looking for revenge?
I definitely think one team will win. That's going to be my prediction for this week, is that one team will win and one team will lose. But in all seriousness, Mason, what do you think score-wise? OU, I guess, is the projected favorite. I don't know what the point spread is.
We keep going into these games and picking OU to absolutely just pull away from their opponent. And then, against Tulane, against Nebraska, it literally just doesn't happen. And I think it's a state of where they're at offensively right now. And I don't think West Virginia caters any better of a defensive matchup to really open things up for OU offensively. So I don't really have a set number in my head, but I think OU wins this game by 2 touchdowns at most, and it really could come down to 1. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as Mason here. Again, the one time that we're not gonna pick OU to win by a whole whole lot, they're going to actually do it. But I'm sort of with Mason here. I think this is a closer game, probably in the single digits even, in terms of point differential.
And now that we've said that, Spencer Rattler, 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, you can book it.
Yeah, you heard it here first. But anyway, I think that's a good time to wrap up. This has been the second episode of Goal Oriented. Before we send you off, please be on the lookout for our CQ story. That's Crimson Quarterly. Mason and I did an oral history from every big figure in college football that discussed OU and Texas's impending move to the SEC. That has voices from Joseph Peruz Jr., the university president, Joe Castiglione, Tommy Harris, a lot of other big names in OU athletics. Mason, what can you tell me about that story and why people should pick it up?
Well, do you know what Jordans are?
I do know what Jordans are, and I know that's why a big thing with OU's move is that they will be wearing those, and people are going to like them in the SEC. Florida already has them, so
yeah.
We'll see what happens.
But in all seriousness, really just we definitely reported this as much as we could in terms of gathering sources from not only people that we hadn't talked to before and that nobody had talked to before about the SEC, but also pulled everything from like literally every press conference, every conversation, every meeting that's been held about this event about this move that we have access to. And so I really think that the story we created, Chandler, I mean, I think it is currently the definitive story about OU's move to the SEC in this market. And I think people will really enjoy just reading the oral history style and seeing what everybody involved with this move is saying about OU going to the SEC.
I will give that a figurative retweet. But thank you guys so much for listening. Austin, do you have anything to say before we send ourselves off?
Before we go, follow me at Austin Curtright on Twitter. There's a video of me absolutely crossing Chandler on the OU football field. It's hilarious. I think I could probably make a D1 tryout if we tried. Give me 6'3". I'm in the NFL right now. I'm not a journalist. Maybe even basketball even, but either of those two sports would survive.
But anyway, that has been the second episode of Goal Oriented. I've been Chandler Engelbrecht. You can follow me at CT Engelbrecht. Mason, what can they follow you at?
They can follow me at Mason_Young_0.
And with that, please tune in to OUdaily.com for all your OU football needs. Like I said last week, we'll be having stories come out every week when the Sooners play for everything OU football. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.